welcome along to Man in the Mirror. It's Hayden Williams here, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Steven Gontarski, who is the manager of the two LA scent bar stores. And as I mentioned in my introduction, he also has another life as an artist, a visual artist, and a sculptor, which I'm sure we'll touch upon. But first of all, good morning, Steven. How are you?
Hi, Hayden. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting.
Well, likewise, a real thrill for me because I've enjoyed the content that you do on Lucky Scent for, I'm still quite new in my sort of inverted commas fragrance journey, as it were. So over the last few years, but the content that gets put out by Lucky Scent, and obviously in a physical bricks and mortar sense in the stores, I just think is such a brilliant way of bringing fragrance to life, but making it really, really accessible and really fun, and done with that, I don't know, with a kind of with a real genuineness, but with a kind of coolness and a slickness that we can only dream of here in the UK. But it's just done with a slight kind of Hollywood sparkle with all you and your amazing colleagues, and I love it. And I love just hearing, when you go off on certain themes or you take certain fragrance notes. And I don't know why, to be honest, I should have had you on so much earlier, but I thought maybe it would never be possible. So I'm absolutely delighted that you've come on, and it feels like I'm kind of getting to chat to a real
Wow.
fragrance superstar.
I know. I
And
feel so flattered by that. That's amazing because as we were just talking before we started recording about you do things and you feel it's kind of like a vacuum because you don't
yeah,
get
definitely,
tons of feedback,
definitely.
especially, at the moment you're doing it. So we don't we don't really know how it comes across, and I'm so happy to hear that you enjoy
Oh,
it, that other people like
I love
listening
them.
to us.
I love them, and I think it's almost, I don't know, it's a different conversation, but I think it's almost cultural. Like sometimes my wife and I would sort of watch, if you watch some American reality TV shows, it just seems like anyone that takes part in those shows has a sort of, it seems to us anyway, but much more of a sort of confidence about them, and a way of articulating themselves, and how comfortable they are on screen. And I'm not suggesting for a second that the stuff you do on Lucky Scent is like a reality show, but it's that kind of, there's a really, really easy, comfortable way of putting that stuff across, which I've no doubt has fans all over the place, and that, I guess that's the, again, we'll get into all of this, but that's the
Yeah.
joy of social media now, isn't it? That you
Yeah.
can kind of, the tentacles spread far and wide,
Yeah.
and the thing that we love, you can end up kind of talking to people all over the world.
Yeah, that makes me so excited to hear because I think when we're making these videos or doing live streams, it's so straightforward. We're just talking about things that we're excited about, and we try to talk about why they're exciting
Yeah.
to us. And it's a very, very simple formula, and we just try to stick to that. So I'm glad it connects to some people.
Oh, definitely. But I think, that enthusiasm and passion goes a long way, and I think, that's the heart of it. And for me, in my tiny little way, with either with the writing or certainly with the podcast, I think it's just about, I'm trying to kind of communicate the joy that I get from things, whether it's,
Yeah,
skincare, grooming, but certainly with
yeah, for
fragrance. And
sure.
I just want more men, particularly, to get to experience some of that. And the way I'm trying to do that is just talk to people that I admire, or some brand founders or perfumers or journalists, whatever it might be. But I think the more we're having these kind of conversations about normalizing things that should bring great joy, and
Yeah,
these sort of sensory experiences, it doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be impenetrable, doesn't have to be a difficult thing to
yeah,
get
it
to
shouldn't be.
understand. And when I see you, and is it Dana?
Dana, yeah.
Yeah, love her. Um, just that sort of straightforward communicating of something that gives great pleasure. So I love it. But look,
That's great.
we'll
Thank you.
get more into your role, and maybe how fragrance retail, or how things are a little bit different, because I have to say, I don't know too much about how it works in the States. I'm lucky enough
Mm,
to deal with some of the distributors here and talk to PRs, of course, and brands. So I have a little bit of a handle on the UK market, and I suppose we're close enough to France and Italy and places like that. So, but it's really interested to hear how niche and kind of independent brands work in the States, and how you work with that. But I guess first of all, I also, as you would expect, I did a bit of digging online, and I found Steven Gontarski, and there was lots of information about art and sculpture, and I wrongly assumed, well, that must be just a different person. But I think some people might be surprised to hear about that, and also the fact that you studied here at Goldsmiths in London. So there's this whole other side to you, which I'm not surprised in the slightest now I've read about it. But if you could tell me a bit about that side of your life and the sculpture and the journey. God, I hate the journey phrase, but yeah, I mean, I knew that there would be other strings to your bow, and there it is. And in fact, even in London, in Central St Giles's Piazza, there's one of your amazing sculptures. So I'd love to hear a bit more about your art.
There have been a bunch of chapters, and I'm 51 now, so there've been different parts of my life concentrated on different things. So art has always been a thing for me, obviously. I grew up in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, in a little suburb, and it's just the most American Hollywood version of a suburb. And I went to that high school with cheerleaders and football players in the hallways. That.
And who were you at that high school? What kind of character?
I was the
main character, energy, or sidelines, or
I was the
jock, or what?
I was the artsy, bookish kid.
Of course you were.
Yeah, and so I hung out with the other artsy, bookish kids, and.
Would you do the school production? Would you have a little sing and dance or not?
I'm embarrassed to say I have.
Did you?
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
I tried it out. You got to,
Yeah. What were the shows? What would you have done?
What was I in? I was in a musical called Brigadoon. No. I wasn't in Brigadoon. What am I even talking about?
That's Scottish, isn't it? Yeah, the Scottish one.
I wasn't even in that. I think maybe I wanted to be in it.
Yeah.
No, I was in a musical called Carousel.
Oh,
which
yeah.
Actually, interestingly enough, one of the composers of Carousel, I think, is Oscar Hammerstein.
Yeah,
and
it is.
He grew up, lived and worked in my hometown of Doylestown, Pennsylvania. So, it's our little claim to fame.
Yeah. It's funny, as a complete detour, but my friends at school, my friends were the kind of sporty guys. I was okay. I wasn't, certainly wouldn't have been picked for the football, soccer team or anything like that. But I was a drummer, and I actually, really got into acting and ended up doing a drama degree. But I was the only one that did that kind of stuff. But I loved it. But my mates were not the kind of artsy guys at all. But I realized my crowd is the kind of people who are more into art and theater and music and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, band guys and all of that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I felt very stifled in that kind of environment. And I was fortunate enough to have an experience. The state of Pennsylvania, I don't know if they still do this, but they had this really great setup called Governor's School, where the state of Pennsylvania funded basically an arts camp for high school students. And so I applied as a musician, and luckily got into the program. And it's the first time away from home where you spend the whole summer with other artsy kids doing music and writing and visual art. And it was the most breathtaking, liberating experience, because I realized that there was a world outside of Doylestown, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And having to go back and finish school was terrible and incredibly depressing. But, I just had to get through it.
Yeah.
But I knew that there was a light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, exactly. And you'd seen the possible, hadn't you? You'd seen what you could do. So did you then, in terms of the visual art and the sculpture, was that a university? Was that interest always there?
So I went to university at Brown, and my concentration there was called architectural studies, which was sort of a hybrid of architectural history and theory. And Brown is next to Rhode Island School of Design. So I was actually able to take some architectural design courses at the same time. So I guess there was a moment where I thought I'd probably go into architecture.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like I'm mentioning this because I wrote a senior thesis, which my thesis advisor hated because I don't think it was very academically rigorous, but it was exciting for me. And I was interested in synesthesia. So the point
Right.
of the thesis was to compare musical structures to architectural structures and finding these parallels as kind of journeying through different spaces with delineations and boundaries over a course of time. So I thought that was fascinating. I still find that
Yeah.
fascinating, but it's a little bit woo-woo, but I
I'm
find
into it.
get a lot of inspiration from that. And so when I finished at Brown, I moved to New York and I got a job in an art gallery. And that I think was a very important stage for me. I lived in New York
Hmm.
for a couple of years doing this job. And it was a very interesting gallery. It was called Exit Art, and it was in Soho. I started the job in 1994, so this was kind of the very end of a very interesting chapter in New York where
Yeah.
Soho was the center of art.
Yeah.
And the 80s art scene in New York was very exciting. So much
Uh-huh.
happened, so many characters coming out of it. So by the time I moved there and worked at this gallery, it was the very end of it. All the galleries were moving to West Chelsea. And this particular gallery was a nonprofit space. And it
Hmm.
was run by a remarkable woman named Jeanette Ingberman. She grew up in Brooklyn. She went to Columbia, studied art history, and she's an old school lefty who was
Yeah.
interested in alternative art, conceptual art, up and coming artists. That was her
Hmm.
thing. So it was very decisively a nonprofit space. And it was a very difficult job because there's no money in nonprofit
Yeah.
institutions. And we were expected just to work nonstop. But it was such a rewarding experience because I was there in the middle of all of it, meeting all of the up and coming artists of New York and preparing shows for them. And it's actually being in that environment that made me realize I could have a stab at this. I could do art, you know?
Yeah.
I'd been making things all along, not very seriously, but I decided to just pursue that. And that brought me to London. I did this MFA at Goldsmiths. And it's that kind of thing where things just aligned correctly. So I was able to stay there and make art. And I was
So
there
was
for
that
10
mid
years.
90s as well, Stephen?
Yeah. So I was in London from 96 to 2006. That was my chunk of time there.
And
And
for people who know the city, I guess that kind of late 90s time was a fun time in
it was
London.
great.
Like Cool
It was
Britannia,
great.
Damien Hirst, all of that. And I know you were involved with places like the ICA and White Cube, and yeah,
It was
that
very
must have.
exciting. Yeah.
I mean, that was the beginning of my working in music, and there was a really exciting time in terms of British music, the
Oh,
renaissance of that, and Britpop, and all
yeah.
of that. Radiohead and Blur and Oasis and everything else, and Kate Moss
Absolutely.
and the Gallaghers, and so it must have been a fun time to be involved in art in London.
Oh, absolutely. It's what I had hoped when I moved to London to go to Goldsmiths. I had never been to London or the UK. So when
Right?
I went over there with my suitcases, it was the first time, but I felt that I knew what it would be like because I'm such an Anglophile and
Yeah.
I'm very much into music. So certain bands meant everything to me. And so I just figured, well, if they're producing this music, this is the right place for me.
What were
And
you
it
into at the
was.
time? What was the music of the UK that you liked
Do you
when
know
you were
what's so
studying?
funny is nothing's changed. I still listen to the same things that I did 35 years ago, like literally
Yeah.
on a daily basis. So the first time I ever bought a Cocteau Twins record, it just changed my life. And
Yeah.
last night I sat around listening to Cocteau Twins. Nothing's changed in that
Such a great
regard.
band. And Simon Raymond went on to do such brilliant things with Bella Union, and
Absolutely.
just those kind of bands and acts that just have exquisite taste, don't they? And then sort of that
Oh,
permeates through everything. I loved. Well,
all
actually,
of
that
it.
then he started signing things like Midlake and John Grant, and
Yeah.
yeah, stuff I really like anyway.
Oh, and it's so exciting, and how Robin Guthrie went more into ambient music,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Brian Eno's one of my heroes, and
right.
I had worked with Harold Budd, another one of my heroes. At one point, actually, before I had my first solo exhibition at White Cube, the exhibition before me was a Brian Eno installation. And so
Wow.
just things like that just
Yeah.
made me realize, oh, this is so right. These are my heroes, and I'm kind of working among that. And it was
You
very
become part of the
exciting.
culture.
Yeah. It was really wonderful to do that, to be an artist, to have that career until it wasn't anymore. And it kind of came to a natural, I don't know if it was a natural end, but I kind of started winding things up and started pursuing different things and
Did you
starting a different chapter.
did you fall out of love with art? Do you think it was? I know it's difficult. Do you think it was a sort of economic reason, or did you start to, or did other things take on an increasing importance? It's always I do find it interesting, and I've had musicians on before who've talked about changes in career and things like that. I just wonder, was it something in you that sort of started to withdraw, or was it a more
Yeah.
sort of positive that other things started to kind of
You know
happen in your
what?
life, which I guess a bit of everything maybe.
It was all of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So different things. I felt that the relationship I had with the gallery started not working anymore, and it wasn't really doing me favors. And so I tried to think of solutions to it. I had done exhibitions in LA at that point. LA was very foreign to me because I
Mm,
grew up in the Northeast.
yeah,
But whenever I would go to LA, it seemed very freeing and wonderful, like a permanent vacation.
yeah, yeah.
So I thought, I'll try that. In addition, my mother had moved from Pennsylvania to Arizona to retire. And, I'd been in the UK for 10 years at that point, and she was getting
Mm,
at this age where I started worrying that
yeah.
she would probably need some kind of assistance, some sort of just family presence. So that was another big factor in my moving to the West Coast.
Did she just want some better weather? Why did she choose
Oh, yeah,
Arizona?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a
She
common? I don't. Is that a place to go and retire, or go
It's
take
one
it
of the
easy?
places. It seems
Yeah,
like a lot of people go to
or
Florida or
Florida.
Arizona.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So they just have sun and it's a more
Why?
laid back
Why not?
lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah,
Also, one thing you mentioned was also financial factors, things like that. That
yeah.
also came into effect for sure. The art world had changed as well in the 10 years that I was an artist. And I didn't love it. I think a lot of the reasons why people become artists is because of the storytelling and the communication that they have with other people. That was very
Mm.
important to me. But it was very much, in my experience, like being in a vacuum. You would make something, you wouldn't get feedback. You don't know where your pieces go. You don't know how the people who are consuming it are consuming it.
Well, you
There's very
genuinely
little of
don't get
that.
to hear where things are sold. I suppose you don't always get to know who bought them and where they go. I suppose.
They might be casually mentioned, and I've
Yeah.
met some of the collectors, and that was great. But then a lot of it, for me, seemed to be going into this direction of international art fairs, auctions, investing, and that for me took the soul out of it. And it's not really something I wanted to be in anymore. And
Mm.
I mean, I like the storytelling. I think we'll get into that in a
Yeah.
second about
Yeah. Yeah.
perfume, which I think allows me to do that so much more in a very direct way.
Yeah.
But then there was also the financial things. It was coming to a point when I moved to LA and tried to just plop everything in a different city. I thought it would be that easy to just start a career in LA. And
Yeah.
I found out it wasn't. It's a totally
I
different set
guess
of
it can be quite. I
circumstances.
mean, only from visiting, but what I read, I imagine it can be quite an unforgiving place. I guess you need a certain amount of money just to operate, well, which you do anywhere,
Yeah.
but certainly in LA, I don't imagine it's much fun if money's not there to make things happen.
And the art scene in LA is much smaller. It's
Is
just
it?
a totally different experience.
Mm,
Absolutely. Yeah. So I did it for a little while. I still had some projects that I was working on that I could do from LA, and I finished those up. And in the meantime, I just started kind of exploring other options, and which leads me to Scent Bar and Lucky Scent.
y- yeah. So, and it was interesting when you talked about some of your earlier study and architecture, and I've sort of long my sort of pet theory, which I'm sure isn't just mine, but it's funny the amount of people I've spoken to, even on the podcast, where there's this intersection between people that studied architecture and then got into fragrance, and obviously you were talking about it in terms of music and architecture, but I guess that kind of comes back to this whole idea where, of course, all of the arts and all of the senses, there's a sort of meeting place in the middle, isn't there? And you came from sculpture and art, and it doesn't seem surprising that this world of olfaction and perfume is
Oh,
appealing and interesting, and you find out about storytelling and narrative, and it's all the things that we love. But anyway,
absolutely, yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like,
It's
of course, if you open yourself up to music, architecture, visual art, dance, like perfume makes, or it seems to make sense to me in that
for
in that
sure.
way.
I mean,
It's just another way of looking at it.
I see this happen so consistently that it's not a coincidence. There's something
No,
there. So much of our clientele in this store is involved in music. It's a thing.
really,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We have
yeah,
so many musicians, some very well-known musicians who are
I'm
obsessed
sure.
with fragrance,
Yeah,
and I get it. I am. So
yeah, yeah.
it's there. It's
And
for
so
sure.
you're in LA, and we've obviously talked about Lucky Scent, which is the sort of the website of Scent Bar. But was it just literally sort of walking in and saying, "Have you got a job?" Or did you know people?
Yeah.
Was that your first sort of retail job
Yeah.
then?
So, I mean, the through line to all of this stuff, like being a kid in Pennsylvania, studying
Yeah.
architecture, all that stuff was my obsession with scent. That's just been
So
current
that
ever
was
since
there
I was a
from
toddler.
early
Absolutely.
days.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And was that because of? Do you think that was someone? Was that someone in your family that sort of imbued that sort of love for you, or was it something you discovered from elsewhere? Do you think?
I mean, my parents liked fragrance and they always had fragrance, but not to the same extent. I was literally that freakish little kid in the supermarket smelling every shampoo in the aisle. I was maybe 5 years old, just smelling every shampoo. I was,
Getting chucked out by the security guard, going, "Who's that?
and
What's he
then
doing?"
when I was a little bit older, I would go to the department stores with my mom, and I was just kind of free. This was the early 80s. It was different. I was just free to roam around as a little kid at the department store by myself. And I would go to the fragrance counters and just spray everything on. And,
All
I
at
was,
once is
yeah, yeah.
cocktail.
And I was a nerdy little kid with a bowl cut and big glasses and a corduroy jacket, just spraying perfume all over myself. But I
I
got
love it.
so much pleasure from smelling nice things and would think
Mm.
about it. Even as a kid, I knew the perfumes that my teachers wore. I remember my second grade teacher wore Ginate. Our music teacher wore Cinnabar from Estee Lauder. I don't know how I knew this, but I
Well,
just
so
knew.
you weren't asking them; you just knew.
No, I mean, I must have asked them. I don't know how else I would have known.
It had
But
incredible nose.
But I just thought that was normal. I thought all kids wanted to know what perfumes their teachers wore. But, for me, it was a very important question to ask and something to
But
know.
it definitely seems to me that there's a sort of, again, a common thread of people who've ended up in the industry. It's an interest from, it's often an interest from early on, isn't it? And
Yeah.
sort of being led by one's nose and being curious, and that's the sense that kind of
Yeah.
that they connected with. I
It's
love it.
always been my obsession. So
Yeah.
in London, Liberty was my place. I would
Oh,
go
so great.
there as
Yeah.
my source of discovery because I still, to this day, I think in the UK, it's maybe the best place to discover fragrance because I love the curation. I love how they
Yeah.
nurture brands. And
They do, and they're often the first place to go with cool new brands, aren't they? And
yeah,
yes, it's a beautiful. I mean, for those that don't know it, it's this historic, beautiful department store just off Oxford Street in London. But yeah, it always seems to have a slightly more artsy kind of cool feel, doesn't it? And
yeah.
as you say, curated brilliantly, and staff that know what they're talking about, but will let you discover. Yeah,
They're doing
it's a
something
great place.
great. And I have to
Yeah,
say, I would go to all the department stores in my London years, and there's been a change, in my opinion, since I left. And I was back in the UK this past Christmas, and I went to Liberty, and it was just as magical and
Mm.
wonderful as and rewarding as it has ever been for me. But the last time I went to some of the other department stores that I would go to, I just found it a little bit more bland or generic, the same as every other department store in the
Yeah,
world. And they seem to have lost their magic or their sense of creativity
yeah.
or courage to discover new things. So
And I think
I'm
sometimes you can end up with these. I don't know. Yeah, let's not name them, but in some of these big stores, it becomes about sort of giant installations
yeah,
and yeah, obviously the bigger brands. But yeah, it doesn't that sense of a tone of voice and a certain style of things. It seems a bit harder, doesn't it, in the bigger ones on Oxford Street and yeah,
absolutely.
I don't know.
I mean, it
But I
got to a
guess
point
this,
where a few years ago, I came back to London, and in the duty free at LAX, I saw certain things on the mannequins in luxury stores. And then I went to some of the big department stores in London, saw the exact same things on the
yeah,
mannequins. And that
yeah,
to me was incredibly depressing. I wanted to find something that wasn't duty free in
yeah,
a really wonderful retail institution
totally.
like some of these department stores.
And I think we can feel like that about, obviously not just in perfume, but as our, certainly in the UK and our town centres in general, this identikit place, you could be Manchester, could be Bristol, could be London, could be
Yeah.
Newcastle, and where do you go to find the new, the exciting, and the knowledge? And I suppose it's where we talk a bit more about, niche and independent perfume
Yeah.
retail. And there's some great examples here. So you end up at Scent Bar in LA,
Yeah.
and
So, I mean, when I moved to LA, I knew about Lucky Scent and
yeah,
just for entertainment. I know this is common for a lot of people who shop on Lucky Scent. I would just be sitting at my computer, scrolling through, reading about all these perfumes. It was so entertaining for me and exciting. And I wondered if there was a retail brick and mortar, and
yeah,
sure enough, there was one, and it was
there
in
you go.
LA. So that was a huge coincidence. And I hadn't been living in LA very long at that point. So I stopped in, and at the time, the store hadn't been open very long, and it was in a different location to where it is now. And it was tiny, kind of like
Mm,
just a big closet
yeah,
with a few shelves with perfumes. And at the time, it seemed like a lot, but now when I look back at those pictures, it's kind of laughable because we have like, I don't know, just so much more. We're full
yeah,
to bursting in our shelves now because,
yeah, yeah,
well, we'll get into that later. This explosion in
yeah,
niche perfumery, it's just expanded so much in the past
totally.
10 years.
So did they offer
And
you a job?
so, yeah, I remember speaking to the woman who worked there, who is a friend still to this day.
Mm,
And we just had a fantastic conversation. Interestingly enough, I think her background was also architecture. And
really?
yeah, yeah. And we just had just a great chat. And so I started going there regularly just to talk about perfume. And it just seemed to be my place.
Mm,
And
you found your
so,
people.
yeah.
Yeah,
And it turns out she was leaving LA to study perfumery in Gras, and she actually became a nose. And
really.
so I stepped in and took that job. And then pretty soon after that, the owners of Lucky Scent asked me to manage the store, which wasn't that hard to do because it was so small. It was a
Yeah.
very tiny store. We didn't have that many customers. And I've been there now for 13 years.
So there you go. So you manage both the LA stores and have a kind of oversight of some of the content creation on Lucky Scent, which,
Yeah.
as we've mentioned, it seems to be a brilliant way of communicating what's online and in the physical stores. We're going to chat a little bit more about perfume, and I definitely want to find out more about the American retail scene. But as always on the podcast, I love to find out about the guests, some of the products you might use, whether it's in the morning and evening, your kind of your routines and what products you like and work for you. So I'd love to know from you, Stephen, is there an extensive morning and evening regime? What? Because there's you'd be amazed at you've very kindly heard some of the podcasts, so it goes from everything from soap and water to 10-step Korean,
Yeah.
skincare and people that need an hour before they leave the house. I mean,
Yeah.
where are you on that
Well,
continuum?
I do love me a product, but
I
it's,
like products.
yeah, but I've gone through different phases. Especially in my 30s, I was a lot more active about discovering
Yeah.
skincare products and tried a lot more things. Now it's pretty bare bones and pretty simple
So you
because,
found a routine that works for
yeah,
you.
and it's incredibly simple. I actually found that if I fuss too much, that I get bad results. I think I have very
Yeah.
sensitive skin.
Right.
So, I mean, for a while I thought I have to tone. It's really important that I tone every day and I need an astringent, da, 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 da. And I kept getting rashes and red spots and it wasn't good. I felt like I was just irritating my skin.
Yeah.
So, uh, as it is, I tend to be kind of oily and shiny. And I always thought that was a
Me too.
problem. So I would just
Yeah.
try and strip that all off and do
Yeah.
mattifying things. But recently, I don't know whether it's laziness or I don't know, or I think that I don't have many wrinkles. So I thought maybe being embalmed in this oil all the time helps with that. So I
It's
don't try
true
to
though, isn't it?
control it
It's
as
it's
much.
yeah. The kind of the downside, and the same for me, is the kind of sometimes being kind of greasy. But actually, I think it obviously means there's more oil in the skin and probably less lines. Maybe
Yeah.
we could take the positives.
Yeah. So I mean, it's very simple. I cleanse in the morning and the evening. And right now I'm using a product that I've just discovered recently that I love. It's from Clarins and it's
Oh
called
yeah.
something like anti-pollution foaming cleanser. And I
Hmm.
like it. It's almost like a paste. It's kind of
Yeah.
thick, but it feels kind of sudsy. I like the way it smells. It says it
Yeah.
has like alpine herbs or something. So
Those
yes,
Clarins
that,
products do smell good, don't they?
yeah.
And that's important too.
Yeah. I mean, before that, I was just using basically supermarket facial
Mm.
cleanser. And sometimes that's great, but the last one was not good. I found a lot of products, whether it's hand soap or facial cleansers, anything in that sort of gel format. I feel some brands are trying this new, I don't know what it is, this kind of carrier or vehicle, which to me seems kind of gloopy and sticky rather
Mm.
than sudsy. And I'm sure, people are getting away from sodium lauryl sulfates and all of that
Yeah.
and that kind of sudsiness, but I couldn't stand that texture. I just felt I was putting some sticky gloop on my face and it wasn't
And it takes
doing.
ages to get off
Yeah,
sometimes, doesn't it?
yeah,
That
yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then after that, I just put on a moisturizer and I'm pretty consistent. I use La Roche-Posay
Yeah.
with an SPF 30.
Yeah, me too.
And
They're really good, aren't they? You get those little white, small sort of
yeah,
plastic tubs. Yeah,
yeah,
square tub things. Yeah,
yeah.
really
And I
good.
like it because it seems kind of light and
Yeah,
just absorbs. I've used other ones with SPF that just leave this white film on your face that
yeah.
I'm not fond of.
No, that's good.
Also,
And
some,
what about hair products, Stephen? Do you put something particular in
yeah,
your hair?
that's been a journey for a long time. I just had very short hair that I cut myself. I would just get the shears and
I saw
go
some
to
pictures
it.
of you with much shorter hair
Yeah,
online.
for a long
Yeah.
time, for a long time, and then a few years ago, I decided to grow the hair out. This is before the pandemic, and then during the pandemic, I just keep going. So it was quite long at some point. I think if you look on Lucky Scent, some of the videos where I'm talking about perfume, my hair is down to here. Yeah, but it's what I wanted to do. I'm kind of entering another chapter as well right now, where I'm in a band. We're doing
Are
music.
you?
Yeah, we have a
What do you
few
play?
shows. I sing actually,
Oh,
and
great.
I sing and I play bass. I'm one of
Songs from
those bass
Carousel.
playing.
Just do
Actually,
all the songs from the shows.
that would be a good twist. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
think about that. No, I mean, as you would probably know from my Loving Cocteau Twins, I love post-punk and goth. So we're
Right.
a post-punk goth band. It's
Great.
kind of dark and moody, but that's
Love
what we
it.
do. So I thought if I'm going to be doing this and writing songs, I don't want this short crop. I need to grow my hair out. So I did. And which seems ridiculous for someone in their late 40s to start thinking about, but whatever. I don't really think about age in that way. So I grew my hair super long. And then more recently, I just started chopping into it because maybe I'm too lazy to book an appointment with a hairdresser.
So
But
you'll do it.
oh yeah, I'll just chop
Yeah.
right in willy nilly and take a razor as well and just kind of like get to the right length and texture. So I do that, and I've decided to start kind of just slicking back and letting the curls at the end do their thing. And a friend of mine told me about curl cream. I feel that women know about these products so much more than men.
They do.
So,
They do.
so it was one of my colleagues, and she said, "Oh, if you want to keep those curls at the end, get a curl cream." And I didn't even know that existed. So I looked into it, tried a whole bunch of ones, and the one that works the best for me is called Multicultural Curls, and it's from a
Love
brand
it.
called Miss Jessie's, which I think is owned by a black woman, and
Yeah.
it's marketed to black women, or in this case, multicultural. And
Yeah.
well, I'm multicultural, so I thought
Yeah.
I should use this. And I love it. I love the texture and the hold of it. It smells nice. It has a little bit of a lily of the valley scent. And
Uh-huh.
my problem with a lot of hair products is I don't like overly fruity scents, and a lot of hair products go in that direction. So
They do, don't
it's
they? Get all kind of
perfect.
berry smells, or
Yeah.
can get kind of very coconutty and all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty simple, straightforward routine. I At night I use a moisturizer, and for years now I've been using either CeraVe or Cetaphil, which are just pharmacy brands in the U.S. and they're great. They get the job done. So I'm very consistent with
Yeah.
buying those products.
And then you've got a great sort of moustache and a, let's say goatee, but do you have to shave the other bits most days, or how do you go about that?
Yes and no. I started growing out facial hair maybe about 10 years ago, and I'm part Korean, and we Koreans don't have big beards. So it's kind of this pattern. Although I would get weird splotchiness, and that's not great. So I do have to wet shave, but
So it would,
not very much,
it might
just
come
to
in
clean
certain
up.
places on your cheek, then you'd have to tidy up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, I just take the trimmers and go at it once a week, and
Yeah.
it's pretty easy and straightforward.
Well, I think the whole look now with the slick back hair and the facial hair is definitely giving kind of artsy rock star energy. So I think it's working really, really well.
Thank you. When I shortly after I started slicking back my hair, actually, I decided to do it before our band started doing its first shows. And I thought, oh, it'll be a good look to slick back. And I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah.
And then this film came out shortly after that. Maybe you've seen it, Tar, starring Kate Blanchett.
Yes, Kate Blanchett.
Yeah.
Where she's the conductor.
The Predator conductor.
Yeah.
And her role is kind of extraordinary. And just all of the attention to detail about her clothing, her bespoke suits, the way she slicked her hair, all of that, I just found so enjoyable. And obviously she's not a great role model, but in some
Not so
ways
much.
that character was a great role model. And I was happy to see that she was slicking back her hair because it was longer. And I thought, I'm doing this too. So we're on the same page. And in one scene, her character, Lydia Tarr, is at the Carlisle Hotel in New York, and she's just getting ready for the evening and kind of brushing her hair, listening to the radio. And I had this scent moment watching that scene where I just knew, I bet the deodorant she uses is Clarins Eau Dynamisante. It just seems like what she would wear.
Yeah.
And it's something that I used to wear in the 90s, like just as a deodorant, and I had this spray of it. So ever since then, I started buying Clarins Eau Dynamisante, and just to have my Lydia Tarr moment every day, and which is also one of the reasons why I got the facial cleanser, because I'm just kind of riding my excitement with Clarins right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in terms of fragrance each day, I guess we're heading into very tricky territory for someone that has so much choice, and I'm obviously in the store and I'm no doubt in your own personal collection. So it's probably a whole other podcast to get into your favorite fragrances and all of that. But the thing that would be interesting is, so like this morning, or when you're going to the shop or doing your normal stuff, what's the kind of thought processes in terms of which fragrance? Is it kind of a seasonal thing? Is it literally what mood takes you, or
Yeah.
because I wonder how you approach it.
It's exactly the same as deciding what shirt to put on. It
Yeah.
depends what I'm going to be doing that day, what
Yeah,
the
yeah.
weather is like, the mood in general. So, and, and invariably, I end up putting something on when I'm at the store. So I'm wearing something different pretty much every day. But in
Yeah.
terms of my own collection,
I'm
it's
sorry,
very
Stephen. Would
curated.
you wait? Say you're getting ready in the morning and you're going to the store. Would you wait to do your fragrancing once you get there, or will you layer and double up, or a combination
You know
thereof?
what? I usually put something on every morning,
Yeah.
no
What have
matter
you
what
gone
I'm
for
doing.
this morning?
Actually, I haven't put anything on yet because I
Huh?
showered to get ready for this. So,
Bless you.
yeah.
What are you thinking about? So take us through your thought process now. You're in a
So
cool black shirt.
there are a few that are certainly in my rotation the most right now, and even though I have kind of a big collection,
Mm,
obviously I don't wear all of them regularly. There's
no.
the ones that are in the rotation. One that is as close to being my signature scent as possible would be Bois d'Argent from Dior. I've been wearing that ever since it came out all those years ago.
Yeah.
And I just recently bought a new bottle of it coming back from London because I'd heard that it was reformulated. I still have some of my old stuff, and I actually wanted to do a side by side comparison. So
Oh yeah.
I might put that on today. There is a scent that really impressed me that came out last year called Rain Tea from a small Australian brand called Chasing Scents.
Oh, I
And
don't know that.
I love tea scents in general.
Me too.
And
Me too.
this one is so special and really unlike any other tea scent I've ever smelled. Most tea scents are incredibly light and fresh, great for summer, but not long lasting in any way. And then when I tried Rain Tea, it had such a mood to it. It's a damp tea smell. So it smells like damp leaves.
Yeah.
And then in addition to it, you get a little bit of honey and chamomile and hay. So it's just a very beautiful, somber scent that stays very nicely on skin too. So I've been wearing that a lot lately.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I want to check that out because I'm a
Oh
big
yeah,
tea fan.
it's
I've
beautiful.
been on a tea tip. I interviewed Jan Wilhelm in the last season, who obviously had the Wilhelm perfumery brand and's now got the BB brand with
Mm,
his wife. Did you check that out when you were at
I
Liberty's over
did.
Christmas? Yeah,
Oh,
I said
actually, no, I
yeah.
didn't. But I checked out your podcast and listened to him talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I haven't
It was
smelled
a
them yet.
we had a really, I met him when he was in London. We did it in person, and he's charming and brilliant, but he's also about 5 feet taller than I am. This kind of like, Scandinavian ex model and very charming,
Yeah.
skinny, and yeah, very tall. So he looked like, and we were talking about his love of British comedy and how he loved Faulty Towers, and he watches Faulty Towers every morning, which I laughed. But yeah, Ghost of Tom from BB, which is not a million miles away from Dear Polly, one of the Wilhelm ones, but again, a good tea scent, I think.
Mm.
Well, look, we could talk about fragrance choices for a very long time, but I'm really interested in, because I don't really know very much about it. How the sort of indie niche scene works in the States, and would I be right in thinking, obviously there's websites and people can ship things around, but would there be certain cities and pockets where shops like Scent Bar, obviously they're in New York and LA on either coast, but it, I can't imagine that there's sort of niche and indie stores in a lot of towns. I guess do you
There,
have to go to some of the
there
bigger cities,
not
because like we
many.
said about department stores, everything being kind of
Yeah.
identikit, that's certainly that's the case here in the UK too. But, I guess
It's
there's
actually kind of
certain,
shocking the absence of retail spaces for niche perfume. And
in the States.
yeah, very
Yeah.
much. So a lot of the people who come into the store are obviously customers from the website, and they're coming into LA, and it's actually really wonderful to see. They make a pilgrimage to Scent Bar. Sometimes they
Yeah,
come
I
with their
bet they do.
suitcases. They come directly from the airport,
Yeah.
and and that's really wonderful. I get it. If I
Like
didn't
fill a
work there, I'd
case,
be the
fill
same.
me up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But especially with Barney's, a big department store closing a few years ago,
Hmm.
they're just left this void in terms
Yeah.
of perfume retail.
So
A
was
lot of
Barney's
people,
better did Barney's
yeah,
do some of the more niche brands?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. A lot of people discovered Serge Lutens and L'Artisan
Mm.
Parfumeur and Frederic Malle through Barney's.
Gotcha.
And this brings me back to what we were talking about department stores and visiting some of them in London and being kind of disappointed. It's kind of a big question mark of where all of that's going, because in the United States, department stores are having a really hard time and a lot of them are just dying off. And that certainly happened to Barney's. That was a major casualty. So we have people from everywhere, like big cities like Chicago, saying there's nowhere to buy perfume, which is so
Really?
hard for
And
me
that's
to
a huge
understand,
city. Yeah.
but it's actually true.
Yeah. So so the website of Lucky Scent, I guess, is a real kind of boon for American. Is it one of the main places that people would have access to niche perfumery? Is this just online by
Absolutely.
Lucky Scent?
And even outside of the States, we get a lot of customers from the UK, from Germany, from Australia, and
So you'll ship everywhere.
oh yeah, well, not every country, but many countries outside of
Yeah.
the United States.
Yeah.
I keep hearing about other stores that have been opening, like Philadelphia, Portland, specializing in niche, and certainly in San Francisco. And that's great. It's exciting. It's a whole world, and there's the appetite for it because there's so many more brands. And I've seen for myself how it's just expanded, mostly because of social media. Ever since
Yeah.
the lockdown and COVID, the whole audience for niche perfume has just exploded. I've seen that. So I think there are more stores popping up to cater to this.
Yeah. And I mean, we were talking before about storytelling and narrative, and it feels like, there's only a certain kind of retail environment where you're able to communicate in that way. And that doesn't necessarily suit the kind of big department store where you kind of spray people as they go by in a kind of aggressive fashion. It needs time, and it needs curation, and it needs someone who's more knowledgeable, I guess. So that's where Scent Bar comes in, I suppose.
The approach is very different from a department store. And I think the owners of Lucky Scent, they're two owners, they're fantastic. They always wanted that. They didn't want the department store experience, and neither did I. I don't enjoy that because with department stores, usually the people who are working there work for the brand rather than for the department store. So they're very much trying to sell that brand. So I find it very aggressive. And sometimes I just want to be left alone to smell, but I'm getting these little pitches and little blurbs that they've learned in training, which I just think is so stupid. Like, a lot of these stories don't mean anything to me because I hear them.
And it's not a conversation, is it? It's not asking you about things that you might be interested in. No, you're absolutely right. I think it's and I think it's often people don't realize, as you say, that the different big distributors or the sales houses will, they might be looking after a certain number of brands, and they might all be collated together on a certain counter or whatever, but you're not getting the full gambit of all the different perfumes, because certain salespeople are kind of pitching you their brands, aren't they? So
Definitely.
I guess it's like a car showroom or something, really, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've always enjoyed talking about perfume. I could talk about it all day, and I do. And luckily, we've sort of amassed this wonderful team of people at the stores, and I'm in love with all of them. I would be, because I selected them to work at the store.
Yeah.
But what I think they all have in common is everyone there is creative. Everyone who works at Scent Bar is either a writer or photographer or musician. Everyone's creative. None of us really come from a retail background, but we all love to talk about creativity and stories. So I think that's the through line of the store. So when people come in, we're not going to talk about like blah, 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 blah. This is a beast mode fragrance that contains cardamom.
Or just kind of parroting the kind of sales note of, this is going to set you free and you're going to feel like the best version of, manhood or whatever.
Yeah. So I think
it just becomes a bit meaningless, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So what we do is when someone comes into the store, we try and figure out what it is that they want. And even if they don't know what they want, they kind of do. So just you have a conversation with them, and it's sort of a matter of finding out who they want to be, like this
Yeah,
person they're trying to project.
yeah,
And they don't need to know about perfume at all. They just need to kind of define this vision of themselves, and then we can
absolutely.
hook them up. It's like
Yeah,
this fragrance will tell a story that's like that. So try this on, and it's a lot of fun doing it that way.
and I guess that's the skill, isn't it, of good retail is finding the sort of passion points for the customer, whether they might enter it via, we talked about music. You could find out about music or kind of styles or bands that people love, and that could be a way in, or say it could
Yeah,
be memory, travel, art, literature, you name it. I suppose it's kind of discerning some of that, and yeah, just finding out what makes people tick. And as you say,
yeah.
it's then you kind of demystify some of it, and it doesn't have to be as
No,
complicated or
it's fascinating to see how perfume plays such different roles for different people,
yeah,
depending on their fantasy. Some people want a fragrance that will elevate them, put them into a higher status. So fragrance is a status symbol. And that's great. You know, if it works for them, I can hook them up in that way.
yeah,
Or that thing about gender, obviously, I don't think that smells are
yeah, yeah,
gendered. That is completely arbitrary and just constructed socially. So I wear whatever I want. Obviously, if
hmm
it smells good on me, I like to wear it. But I do appreciate and understand when people are more rigid about that, because there are
mm,
certain smells that have been marketed as masculine or
yeah,
feminine. So when we smell them, we think of them as a masculine scent or feminine. And it's not like woods and leather for men. It has nothing to do with that. Like an aroma chemical called dihydromercenol is for men. Like that is what we've been marketed, and that's what
yeah,
we associate. And I totally understand that. So if a guy comes in, he wants to come across as alpha male, he's not interested in anything that could possibly be perceived as feminine. I get it. That's what he wants to project. And there are
yeah.
scents for that, for sure.
And it's not your job to kind of, you're not trying to rewire the way he thinks or anything
Yeah.
like that. You're kind of leaning into his interests or the way he or she goes about it. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's
That
really interesting.
it's so interesting to me, and I'm thinking about that a lot more about gendering scent, and it's so not a thing because it's arbitrary, but it so is a thing at the same time. And I have a
Yeah,
friend who is a trans woman, and she was talking about these fragrances that we typically associate as men's scents, kind of like your Axe body spray, these kinds of things. And for
Old
her,
Spice here and
yeah,
places like, yeah,
for her, she stays away from them because they mess with her head. You know,
yeah,
she's a woman. She
yeah,
identifies as a woman, and to have these smells on her doesn't make any sense, and kind of confuses her and sets her back. I
yeah.
completely understand and appreciate that.
It's really interesting. I was having a conversation with a PR person from a fairly big brand the other day, and we were talking about this issue of gendering fragrances and the fact that this brand, it's mostly, they're all unisex and they don't talk about gender in terms of how they present the fragrances. But interestingly, she was just saying, in terms of male customers, they are doing more work in terms of, curating certain fragrances because of that. As you were saying, I think there's still some people that need a bit of a sort of arm around the shoulders to suggest a certain area they might be looking. And, we can kind of rail against it all we like. But
Yeah,
again, yeah, I think these cultural shifts will happen. And but at the moment, if in the UK, and you'll know brand stores like Boots, or Superdrug, you go into those big chemist brands, everything's gendered. There's a kind of a women's section that's all kind of purples and pinks and everything else, and then there's
yeah.
men's that kind of black and
Here
red,
too.
and
Yeah,
so that's not changing anytime soon, is it? So
no.
I guess you can ignore it and say, well, no, everyone has to understand that niche fragrance is all for everyone.
Yeah.
But I think there has to also be a kind of acknowledgement that some people want to shop a certain way and at least want to have some direction, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in what we do at Lucky Scent, obviously Lucky Scent and Scent Bar focuses on niche and independent brands. So
Yeah.
some of these fragrances are so avant-garde that gender has absolutely nothing to do with that
That's the least of
conversation.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we have fragrances that smell like twigs and mud. Like, is that for
Yeah.
a man or a woman? It's
Yeah,
for a
yeah.
person who wants to smell like twigs and mud.
Yeah. Well, look, something else I'm always very keen to find out about on the podcast, as the name of it suggests, I suppose, is the guest's idea of sort of self-image and what they see when they look in the mirror. And I think you and I are of a similar vintage, Stephen. I'm 50, and time is marching on. But I think you're in really, you look brilliant, and you certainly don't look your age. But I wonder, what's your relationship with looking in the mirror and how you look now? Is it something you're conscious of? I mean, are there lots of, do you feel like you're looking in the mirror a lot in the store or not? Or...
Well, not so much in the mirror. I mean, obviously in the bathroom, I just look in
Yeah.
the mirror to make sure my hair looks okay. And I don't really look at my face so much or consider it. But, especially when I was a lot younger, I would see pictures of myself and it's usually cringy in the same way that you listen to your voice and it's so cringy. But I don't know whether it's because I'm older or more accepting. I don't know. Or I actually think maybe it's because I'm doing my own Instagram reels and TikToks just for myself, where I'm getting more personal about fragrances. I'm talking about things outside of Lucky Scent perfumes. And I'm making these videos, editing them myself. So I'm looking at myself a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel
that's the kind of world we're in now, isn't it? And kind of creating content, you kind of have to do it.
Yeah. And so what happens is when you look at yourself now so often, I'm almost seeing myself in the third person. So it's like, oh yeah, that's Steve, And
be careful with that, Stephen. You don't start sort of talking about yourself in the third person either. Who's this guy, Stephen?
If I see Steve in a video and his hair is a little bit weird, or just like, I barely even notice it. It's like, fine, Steve is doing that with his hair today,
He was having that kind of day.
Yeah. So it's a lot more forgiving because I don't, because, you judge yourself so much harsher than you would someone else. Like, I hear people saying this all the time, like, oh, I have to lose this weight because I blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, you look exactly the same as you did 5 years ago. So I don't know where you see this weight, but we're like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I don't think I've had a guest on who lives in LA. Is that ever a factor just in terms of, I mean, obviously our perceptions for us people that don't live in LA, obviously it's people, beautiful people are there and everyone flocks there for the entertainment industries and everything else. Does that ever play into your minds in terms of what you see when you go around, or actually, people who are our age who are certain treatments to kind of to hold back the sound of time and all that? I don't know, or maybe when you're there long enough, you don't worry about it anymore. Do you know what I mean, though? Like it's a city where there's lots of beautiful people.
That's what people associate, sure, with Hollywood and LA. It's honestly on a day-to-day level, I don't think it's different from New York or London or any other big city. It's a big mix of people for sure. And we have celebrities who shop at our store. And when you see them in real life, they just look like normal people. A lot of them. It's not like you're struck with their beauty. And then you realize, God, lighting, camera angles, makeup, they're very important when it comes to being in front of the camera. Of course, there is a big culture of augmenting your looks through fillers, through surgery, this and that. I see it a lot, but of course it doesn't entice me into it because I actually prefer a natural aesthetic. I like it when people just look natural, and when they age naturally, I find that beautiful. So
me too.
I'm not scared of that. I think it's great. So I'm not definitely going to go that route. One thing probably, but maybe this is everyone, I could stand to lose a few pounds because there were moments in my life that I was a lot trimmer and more fit. But number one, I'm 51. And I keep telling myself, like, Steve, if you just make the effort and eat better and exercise more, you'll lose that around your belly. And But then I never get around to it. But at the same time,
sounds very common to me.
I don't live that
Yeah.
lifestyle anymore. In my 30s, I cycled everywhere in London, and I had time in my studio work to leave and go swimming 4 times a
Yeah.
week. I could fit it in. It's not a reality for me now. I don't go to the gym as much as I would like to. So I have a few extra pounds, but I can live with that until I'm in a space where I can carve out more time to do something about it.
Yeah. I totally, that resonates with me a lot. Um, that's really interesting. And finally, Stephen, I wonder what are the things that make you happy and bring you joy?
Mm.
Apart from maybe perfume. Obviously, people will have picked that up. But
I love really simple things. Like last night, I was sitting with my partner and we were drinking wine and listening to Cocteau Twins. And that's what made me happy when I was
yeah,
16. And it's what makes me happy at 51.
yeah,
It's little moments. Like when I was a kid in my bedroom, I would put a record on. I would light incense. I had a blue light bulb, so it was very atmospheric. And I
so
still do
cool.
stuff like that. When I get into a creative flow, it's a real
Yeah,
thing. When
yeah,
you
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
get lost in a project, that's amazing because you don't notice time anymore and you feel completely driven by something else that's not you. I love it when that happens. And since I started doing my own content and I've been getting some reactions to it, I will get comments like, I feel really creative or energized to do something creative. And I gave a talk last spring as part of the LA Scent Week. And I was talking about architecture and art and this and
Mm.
that and storytelling. And a perfumer came up to me afterwards and said, that she was really excited to get into her studio and start blending perfume. She felt
Oh
energized by
wow.
that. And that
Yeah,
to me is the highest compliment, that my enthusiasm for something creative could be infectious to someone else and have them energized to be creative. That to me
yeah.
is the biggest
That's
gift.
amazing. Yeah, totally. Well, I concur that your enthusiasm is definitely infectious, and actually, I love that idea that you've stayed connected to your passions from teenage years. There's always this idea that we should kind of cast all that stuff off, but why should we? It's almost when you're at your purest and you're absorbing art, culture, whatever your thing is. And for some people, it might even be gaming or sport
Yeah.
or whatever it is. But yeah, I think it's great. I still would love to. I love to sit down and put some records on, and whether they're stuff from the '90s or stuff I'm listening to now.
Oh
But
yeah.
that time for yourself and just to connect with the things that you love is really important, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm still that kid with the glasses and bowl cut smelling perfume at the counter, you know? Inside, none of that's
Yeah,
changed.
yeah.
And now I just kind of do it professionally.
Well, yeah. Well, and also I will some of the products that you talked about, and of course your own channels and the channels of Lucky Scent and the Scent Bar. I'll link to it in the program notes and stuff that goes online that I do. But Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate you doing this in the morning in LA, and it's a bit later on here in London. But I've
This was a
long
lot of
been an
fun.
admirer, and it's so great to meet you in person and just be equally charmed on the podcast. And I know people will have taken so much from it. And yeah, look, thanks so much. Keep doing what you're doing,
Thank
and
you so
we
much.
love the content. And yeah, hope to get to see you if I can get into the store in real life in LA. I'd love to
Come,
come and
we're
see you.
waiting for you.
Bless you. Well, have a good day. Take
You
care,
too.
and
Thank you so
thank
much.
you so much for coming on.
Take care.